Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning! Welcome to a bit of a discussion here on my favorite remake, and that's Tactics Ogre Reborn. And specifically, I want to actually compare and contrast this with the Oblivion remaster, because I think it's really cool how we finally have something to point to be like, hey, guess what? You want to see what Tactics Ogre Reborn is? Well, it's kind of like the Oblivion remaster, but also they took it like 20 steps further. So, with that said, let's go ahead and get into this whole little thing here and discuss. So, first of all, let's talk similarities. So both of them actually started off from a fairly similar footprint. They took the original version, and then they said, hey, let's just go ahead and pick this up and kind of continue tweaking it until it's something that's a bit more modern. So in the case of the Oblivion remaster, essentially this meant taking the original thing, upgrading the movement animations. So like technically it's still an actor sliding across a plane when it comes to the movement, but the fact that they're more dramatically moving around when running on water or something like that, the fact that there's cloth physics and such, it's something that leads to more of an immersive feeling. It feels more modern, even if it is, still the original old game. Because oftentimes the same old tagline gets used every single time a game like this comes out, which are like, oh, it's still the same old original thing that you remember, but now brought into the modern age and stuff like that. And realistically, there's a lot more to it, but for most folks that are just kind of glancing at it, yeah, that more or less sums up the point. However, in the case of the Oblivion remaster, essentially what they did from there was they redid the leveling system, which actually Reborn did as well, and then also ended up updating a few of the quests and things to address stuff that was previously there. So, for example, the old horse armor meme became a new quest. We had stuff like a lot of the original voice acting remaining, but getting new voice acting to help better emphasize that every character is potentially a new and different race. Those races got new kind of backgrounds and stuff like that to them. So again, they knew what was important in that particular case and knew what to go forward and address. And we actually saw a very similar thing from Reborn here as well, where just like Oblivion there, they ended up redoing the leveling system, which in both cases was something that was very well intentioned before, but really weirdly executed. So whereas in the case of Oblivion, it basically made you build your character backwards in order to be able to build them optimally, what we saw in Reborn was a case where characters were sort of expected narratively to have an interesting death, and basically would also kind of be invincible at the same time, which is bizarre, okay? It's bizarre for a game about tragedy and war and loss to be like, yeah, but also at the same time, you know what? No one ever died. Like, I know my first playthrough of Tactics Ogre PSP, I had one character that died because they got knocked off a cliff 3 times in a row. That was what it finally took to trigger their permanent death, and that's the thing. Again, both understood what it was that made the original interesting. So in Oblivion's case, we saw that they basically kept everything else verbatim. They're like, okay, the quest's super interesting. The animations being jank, whatever, we can improve that a little bit, but realistically, no one cared about the animations being jank because it was the cool stuff you could do with all of that stuff that really mattered. So, again, they just spruced it up a little bit, and that's all it realistically needed. Like, oh, the original spell system was broken? Yeah, no shit, that's awesome, we're gonna keep that. And so, again, it was a very similar approach to Tor here. Like, oh, is it a little bit broken, that you can potentially bring back your characters and have them take an instant turn? Yeah, no, we should definitely do that. Oh, what's this? You're complaining that it's a little bit weird that your character is potentially able to overpower themselves by collecting a bunch of passives? Yeah, except actually collecting them in this version is a lot more fun than just having them be permanently there. See, in the PSP version, one of the things that they ended up doing was that in order to try to do this whole like tabletop sort of shindig, they ended up putting together this system wherein your characters would passively get a bit stronger every time they leveled up, sure. But also, at the same time, when they were leveling up, they got a one-time bonus because the class was leveling up, which, okay, fine, fair enough, all together in the same place so far. Also, I don't know why I just killed my own ghost, but screw it. Anyway, the point was that they ended up getting passively stronger over time, right? Now, that's all well and good, except for the fact that it is, again, a one-time bonus. The reason that this is important, and the reason that it became a problem as time went on, is that you eventually run out of classes, and this essentially means that every time that you try to replace your characters, they are objectively worse than your previous ones, which wouldn't necessarily be too much of a problem in and of itself if it weren't for the fact that the game's whole plot and story and theme and everything else revolve around this idea of characters essentially sacrificing themselves trying to solve the whole war situation here. Trying to essentially fix a war that they have no control over, that they've essentially lived in their entire life, and so every character can maybe get slightly closer to solving that problem, but they can't necessarily get all the way there alone, right? And so, when a character, let's say, is killed off in the SNES or PS1 version, it's very sudden, it's very visceral, they just randomly get shot across the map, they get hit by a crit, and they're just dead now. They're just dead permanently. Yeah, technically you could bring them back as zombies and then unzombify them. You could potentially get resurrection spells later. Also, I need to kill that fairy to get my stuff back. But still, the viscerality of that character's death is very notable and apparent, like, right in your face, right? You feel it, you know it, but unfortunately it loses its impact when it happens all the time, so they needed to slow that down. Which would be fine, except the way that they ended up doing it when it came to the first time that this game got remade on the PSP, was that they said, okay, you know what? When it comes to characters, we don't want them to be dying all the time, so we give them this countdown timer, right? The countdown timer was because people found Final Fantasy Tactics to be really neat, and so they wanted more of that, and so that's exactly what they did. And that's fine if that was all that they would have done. Unfortunately, they also decided, you know what? Also, you need to be able to also copy another system from Final Fantasy Tactics in terms of being able to transfer your skills. The problem with that, though, is that instead of just transferring them normally, instead it's just an item that's basically sitting in your party menu, allowing you to fully transfer somebody's skills to somebody else because they didn't want their, whole grind to go to waste. Which would be fine in and of itself, except they also decided, you know what, these guys also need to be able to die multiple times in order to be able to actually fully die. And so the end result was this well-intentioned thing where they wanted characters to be a bit less, flimsy, but oh my god, they just straight up are immortal in that version. So ultimately, what we saw over the course of the PSP version was like compromise after compromise that was similar to this, where they had an idea and then they would backtrack that idea and backtrack that idea and backtrack that idea until eventually they more or less lost the original point of the idea to begin with. Which, again, would be kind of fine in isolation. The game was still utterly fantastic to play, and we do have a fan remake called One Vision that basically fully fleshed out a lot of those ideas that they tried to do in that version, but how exactly do you translate all of this absolute chaos to a more modern audience? How do you translate all of this to a situation where people would actually want to play this in this day and age? Like, understanding all these deep, nitty-gritty mechanics on a game that is hard to get immersed into because your characters are functionally immortal is difficult to kind of, pitch forward, as it were. And so what we got was Reborn, wherein on top of the changes that the, let's say, Oblivion remaster ended up doing, where they changed the visuals, as you'll notice there's stuff in the background here, where they remade areas that were from the local area in the background, so that every map feels a bit more immersive. They redid the sounds, they added voice acting to all the characters, so that all of these dramatic, war crime-esque filled moments are going to have a lot more to them. But additionally, they made it so that when it came to the individual characters, sure, they could get knocked down on the ground, but they wouldn't immediately die, but you knew that they were now in danger. They essentially added a sort of situation where your characters were on death's door, and if you didn't do something about it, it immediately felt like your fault. There were very rare instances in which you would actually fully end up losing somebody, because, well, you usually had some warning ahead of time. So when you did end up losing somebody, you knew it was your fault. You knew it's because you messed up, and that gave that a lot more impact. See, a lot of this game's story, a lot of its setting, everything about it is based around that idea that anybody can be gone at any time, and it's never going to be one individual character that ends up solving every problem. And so having those heroic sacrifice moments where a character ends up dying for the purpose of making sure that everybody else can get out of there, those moments when you have just an interesting, memorable character loss that you're going to remember forever, those are important. You know, those are important for this kind of situation, and when you reach the end game, to the point that you can create your own custom created class, and you have somebody that's basically able to magically bring people back from the dead for free, that is a very, very empowering moment all of a sudden. Again, keeping the original cool stuff of being able to have ridiculously strong characters depending on the circumstances, but also adding new stuff, like being able to, let's say, transfer the soul of one character into another to combine multiple classes into one thing, which people assumed was possible before, but was actually directly impossible. Cases where, let's say you went back in time and you wanted to go back through the game's longest dungeon without running into annoying problems like being forced to fully redo the thing. That got solved in this version. Annoying drops in places that were just a pain to get to under basically all circumstances. That was also fixed. The leveling system was fully fixed. When it came to skills that nobody would ever end up using, those ended up getting fixed. When it came to certain items just plain not having a use, those ended up getting fixed. When it came to debuffs, essentially getting overwritten by passive skills that were basically the same debuff stacked multiple times. Once again, as you can imagine, redone and remade in such a way that it's just a cozier version to play overall. And this is funny because this general coziness has led to the occasional person going by and just kind of a drive-by looking for reasons to be mad at it. It's one of those strange things that's been around for quite a while, and regularly the quirks of this game's engine or whatever else will end up getting blamed on this version kind of errantly there. Like just recently, okay? Just recently, I saw multiple different discussions from multiple different angles, essentially complaining that the scaling was not working to somebody's liking for one reason or another. All of this, and sorry for the random cut there, coughs will happen. What's interesting is the way that all of this ends up folding together into creating that interesting character death. Because it not only fully redoes all those other systems to the point that every character can be replaced, and they should be replaced, and they're expected to be replaced, because you don't, let's say, when you previously lost a character and you lost all those level up gains permanently because you suddenly didn't have access to that class to level up anymore, that was more annoying than it was immersive, right? And so what we have in this case is now all of a sudden, okay, those characters, they can be permanently lost, but you know that you can just replace them with another guy and it'll be fine. It's not going to be the end of the world. You're not going to lose anything necessarily that permanent. But what you will see is that character, all of a sudden, they have their stuff left on the ground. And for any random soldier, okay, it's not too big of a deal. You'll notice that that you constantly get reminded over the course of every fight that you lost that character. So, let's say you lose somebody, right? They're just on the ground now. Bit of an unfortunate thing. You can't get to them, and you know that you can either win the fight or you can save that character. So you know that you can't get to them. You can't safely get to them without losing somebody else. So it's just, they're basically a write-off at that point. They become an item bag of the items that they left behind, and every time that somebody picks up those items, you're now getting reminded, because every character can pick up those items and they'll just get added to their inventory. If, let's say, an enemy character picks those up, which they probably will, because let's say they died behind enemy lines or what have you, suddenly you're just reminded every time that that bag is picked up again and again about the fact that you had to let that character die. They're like, oh, do you remember these items? Do you remember this character? Yeah, they're just right over here. Like, guess what? You still fucked up. They still died. I have their stuff. Come and get it. And I love that about this version. Oftentimes, the complaints that end up coming out about it are going to be things like the cards, because you'll see complaints along the lines of well, it's just not as immersive to have these character cards floating around, but they again allow for a very dynamic feeling to these characters, where instead of losing a character's annoying passives and just having them permanently stay in that same state, everybody is in many ways going through a state of flux, right? What I mean by this is that let's say you have a character that's just having a really good day. They get exactly the cards that they needed to get. They're a physical type of character. They get all their physical cards right next to them, and they absolutely kick ass. And then suddenly they die anyway, because they got surrounded, you got overconfident, and that's a situation that the cards put you into, because you were following where they went. Whereas, let's say, we have other characters who, let's say, in the case of that healer over there, she might potentially want to hang back a bit more because she didn't necessarily get everything that she wanted to get. She might play more passively, she might play more aggressively, but the fact that you're kind of subject to the whims of the draw, as it were, means that fights will be a lot more variable every time that you go through. And I, again, really appreciate that from a design perspective, because this game's all about its variability. From its story to the way that characters survive or die or whatever else, the way that the people's day is going, like their daily luck, this has been a mechanic since the very start of the series. I mean, hell, the Knight of Lotus, the one that came out on Game Boy Advance, like there's a friggin' thesis as far as how complicated that thing's daily luck system went. It's been around since forever, and how characters' vibes are feeling that day is, again, going to add to the humanity of this whole system. Because every one of these characters is, again, just a person. You're going to have off days. You're going to have off days. You're going to have situations where somebody that is an absolute pro at something ends up completely messing up over and over and over, and somebody that is a complete idiot gets the better of them. There's a famous story, I forget the names of the people involved, but of a fencer from back in the day. A professional fencer, the guy's entire living was going around and sword fighting people for a living, right? And this guy was an absolute professional. He was great at what he did, and in one situation there was a drunken guy that apparently, it was something along the lines of like the drunken guy wanted to sleep with his wife or something, so he tried to bet him that he would, or something along those lines. And so what ended up happening is that he ends up challenging this fencer to a duel, again, for whatever reason. I don't remember the specifics, but this guy has no experience whatsoever, and he challenges a guy that's a complete professional, and you'd assume in that particular instance that the professional would beat him every time. And under normal circumstances, he would, except that this guy that basically had no idea what he was doing and drunkenly challenged a master of the sort, ended up instead deciding that he would just practice one move over and over and over. He would try to practice hitting the guy's toe. And that stupid bullshit actually worked. He ended up killing the guy because he injured his foot, he staggered back, and then, he ended up getting him. The point is, everyone's going to have an off day. Everyone's going to have those situations when things don't exactly feel right. And these cards, the way that they sort of spawn all over the field, they give people a different feeling depending on how they're playing. They not only add that feeling to the game, but they also allow for more interesting character builds. Like this is the one that I usually use as an example for that, of a character that can be anything he needs to at any given time. If he picks up skill cards, he gets better. Actually, no, we'll go ahead and go over to the Terenius instead, actually. So, like, let's say you have a Terenius, right? If you decide to build him for a more melee focus, he might want those physical cards. If you pick up, let's say, a magical and a critical card, those just happen to be spawning nearby him, suddenly that Drain Heart ability goes from a near nothing damage kind of move to scaling up exceptionally well, because it's like, it starts off at 150. Pick up a magic card, it's like, oh, it's like 220 now. Pick up a crit card, oh shoot, that's like 400 now. And again, you only have 4 slots for your passive cards, but that is potentially a lot of extra. He's healing himself every time he's doing this. He's putting out debuffs like Lament of the Dead here, which also further lowers defense, which means that he can essentially stack that on top of his existing bonuses there. Now suddenly he's doing 600, 700s, whatever else, with this ability that previously was barely a threat, and keeping himself alive the whole time, going from a character that's fairly impractical on paper to an absolute destructive menace everywhere that he goes, right? Then let's say he throws in something like Rampart Aura here, and now he's blocking people's movement at the same time, and that is just so cool from a build perspective. These cards allow for so much flexibility in the system. Again, it understood that stagnation was the problem of that original system. Just like in the case of Oblivion there, where they went to a more Fallout-esque system because it was more logical, in this particular case, rather than having characters be this gigantic pile of stats like it's an MMO, because it oftentimes felt like the PSP version was designed like an MMO, what they did with the cards and what they did with the skills in the system was they made you choose. You didn't have to spend any points or whatever else to get a hold of people's skills, but they were something that you were limited to a certain amount of. But they were always going to be something more interesting. You didn't have to worry about things like Swiftfoot for increasing your movement range, because that was just part of your boots. You didn't have to worry about climbing because that was part of your gloves. You didn't have to worry about your ability to go into water. That was just part of your armor. You didn't have to worry about things like improving your range because that was the staff's job now. Everything was given more flexibility in terms of overall function, and that is just really, really damn cool to me, right? By the way, just another thing here, in case you're wondering about spoilers over who or what is in the team at the moment, this game's story can play out a absolute comically large amount of ways, so this spoils nothing. This is one of potentially infinite timelines, alright? This game's story is, again, very, very variable. One of the main things that Tactics Ogre was about was variability, and this goes back to the Ogre Battle games as well, but these games are about variety. Every time you play through, it's a whole new story. The people that you brought with you are different. Who survived is different. Who survived how is different. Who knew what information is different, and the world state constantly adjusts to your game state, and that is just really darn cool, you know? And this is on top of the more practical stuff like, poison, which isn't a set amount anymore and is a percentage-based thing. But we could make, hell, I have made videos for quite a decently long time explaining all of the little kind of tiny changes that got changed here and there, from debuffs getting a massive boost to a lot of previously useless items having a completely new ability, like these shots completely didn't function before, and now even can be slotted in on somebody that, let's say, cannot throw items normally. Let's say you have a character that's potentially got a very chaotic damage type, which is new to this one, where, like, this character, she doesn't really do very much with her basic weapons. It's all about her finishing moves, and her ability to potentially have counters or debuffs that she's using off those finishing moves, right? And so let's say she absolutely positively needs to finish off something a bit more tanky. She keeps a pocket grenade to just chuck at her own feet. And I've talked endlessly about how you can use knights and their ability to just tank damage for the exact same thing. He keeps two of them on hand because if his armor is up at that point... Shoot, I thought I hit my mute button. Apparently I just hit my volume button. Anyways, at that point, he's basically rocket punching things, you know? And that, from a build perspective, from an interesting character death perspective, that's what leads to Reborn feeling like the most immersive version for most. Like, we do have a lot more mechanical depth to stuff like the fan-made One Vision mod, but when it comes to the Reborn version, the way that everything flows together to make the story feel more real, from the really good voice acting to the way that these skills interact with each other, to the way that everybody's going to have on and off days and whatever else, it makes this version feel so human, you know? It feels so good. And that's the thing. Oftentimes when you ask, like, absolute mega fans of this version, they'll be like, it just feels right. There's something about it feels exactly right. It feels like a well-made ice cream or something. You don't know exactly what's right with it, but damn, something's really right here. So yeah, that's kind of about it, you know? Same old mechanics that were there in the PSP version, but all got reworked to be something that more folks would potentially interact with. You know, like, nobody used damage reflections back in the day because the skill was nearly useless. And now, you know, dragon scale on a dragon is a perfectly viable way to absolutely cheese the hell out of the final boss. Anyways, with that all said, that's all I really had time for here today. So, y'all have yourselves a good one. Thanks for stopping by. I hope this was interesting. Maybe we got some new folks from, the Oblivion side of things that are wondering how this relates to Tactics Ogre. And yeah, if you love open world games, this game is not open world, but its story is definitely a lot more interactive than you would ever possibly believe is possible in a game like this. It is, functionally speaking, war crimes chess through and through, and man, it makes you remember the shady shit you've done. Like, I don't think I've seen any game that really repeatedly smacks you upside the head with your own mistakes, but manages to do so in a way that's, like, just neutral enough to the point that you know you're responsible, but they don't feel preachy about it. Like, seriously, the writing is so damn good in this thing. Anyway, that's about that. Y'all have yourselves a good one. Take care, and thank you for stopping by. Later.